June 10th, 1944, 5:17 hours. Normandy, France. The mist hasn't lifted yet. It clings low over the hedgerows like a damp shroud, swallowing sound, distorting distance. Somewhere in that gray silence, a German sentry tightens his grip on his carabiner 98K. His breath is shallow, controlled. He's been awake for 19 hours. Then, a crack. Not a single rifle shot. Not space, disciplined fire. A storm. Bullets tear through leaves, wood, earth. The hedgerow explodes inward as if struck by a hammer. The sentry doesn't even see the men who fired it. He just hears them. Fast. Loud. Relentless. American voices. Go. 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 You can almost feel it. The difference. Not the careful, measured advance he'd grown used to against British units in North Africa. Not the methodical, artillery-softened pushes on the Eastern Front. This is something else. Something chaotic. And terrifying to be why the summer of 1944, German soldiers have fought nearly every major Allied force. They knew the British style, deliberate, cautious, heavily coordinated. They respected the Soviets. Brutal, overwhelming, relentless in sheer mass. But the Americans? They unsettled them. Not because they were perfect, but because they weren't predictable. In those first days after D-Day, reports began filtering through German lines. Fragments at first, then patterns. American infantry didn't always wait. They didn't always stick to doctrine. They adapted. A German lieutenant from the 352nd Infantry Division would later write, "They attacked with a speed and aggression that did not match their reputation. We expected hesitation. Instead, they closed distance quickly, too quickly. The expectation that Americans would be inexperienced, slower to react, wasn't entirely baseless. Early in the war, U.S. forces had stumbled. North Africa, 1942. Kasserine Pass. Hard lessons. Costly mistakes. But by Normandy, they had changed. Radically. Back in the hedgerows. The sentry is already down. His squad scrambles. Someone shouts for a machine gun. Too late. 3 American riflemen burst through the smoke. M1 Garand's raised, firing as they move. Semi-automatic. 8 rounds. Rapid fire. Again and again. The German soldiers return fire. But something is wrong. The rhythm is off. The Americans don't pause like expected. They don't fire, take cover, reload in predictable cycles. They keep pushing. It feels endless. That rifle, the M1 Garand, was more than just a weapon. It changed the tempo of combat. German infantry relied heavily on bolt-action rifles. Precise, powerful, but slower. Their doctrine centered around machine guns, with riflemen supporting the MG-42. But American squads, they were built around the riflemen. Every man capable of sustained, rapid fire. And in close terrain, like Normandy's bocage, that mattered. A lot. The German corporal, later captured near St. Lo, described it bluntly. They fire faster than we can think. That's not literal, of course. But in combat, perception becomes reality. And reality shapes fear. IT wasn't just firepower. It was behavior. American infantry had a tendency, one that baffled German officers, to improvise aggressively. Small units broke off, flanked unexpectedly, pushed through gaps without waiting for orders. To a rigid command structure, that looked reckless. To the men facing it, it looked unstoppable. In one after-action report, a German officer noted, "Enemy infantry penetrated our position without coordination with armor or artillery support. Despite this, they succeeded." Read that again. Despite this, they succeeded. That's the moment something shifts, because now the assumption cracks. If a force can win even when it breaks its own rules, how do you predict it? How do you stop it? The mist in Normandy begins to lift. The firefight is over in less than 3 minutes. Silence returns, but it's different now. Heavy, uneasy. The German survivors don't talk much. They don't need to. They've felt it. That speed, that pressure, that refusal to slow down. And somewhere, deep beneath training and doctrine, a thought begins to form. These men fight differently. But this is just a beginning. Because what the Germans experienced in those hedgerows wasn't an isolated incident. It was a pattern, one that would repeat, from the beaches of Normandy to the forests of the Ardennes. And each time, it would leave behind the same question. Why did American infantry feel more dangerous, even when they weren't supposed to be? The answer doesn't start on the battlefield. It starts years earlier, with how they were trained. September 3rd, 1942, 1440 hours. Camp Toccoa, Georgia. The sun is merciless. Heat rises off the red clay like a living thing, pressing down on the men struggling up Kahi Mountain. Boots slam against dirt. Breath burns in their lungs. Sweat stings their eyes. 3 miles up, 3 miles down. The shout echoes again. No one answers. They're too busy surviving it. This is not Europe. Not yet, but this is where something different begins. American infantry training, especially by mid-war, was not designed for perfection. It was designed for pressure, for confusion, for exhaustion, and most importantly, for initiative. Instructors at places like Camp Toccoa, Fort Benning, and later in England hammered one idea into recruits. If the plan fails, you don't stop. You adapt. You move. You attack. Contrast that with the German army. The Wehrmacht trained its soldiers under a doctrine known as Auftragtaktik, mission-type tactics. On paper, it actually encouraged initiative. Junior officers were expected to act independently if cut off from command. But by 1944, reality had shifted. Losses of experienced NCOs and officers meant fewer leaders capable of executing that flexibility. Replacements were younger, less seasoned, more rigid. Orders became tighter, more cautious. The Americans, on the other hand, were scaling up. Millions of men, rapid expansion, a force still learning, but learning fast. And because of that, they built a system that relied less on perfection and more on adaptability. Back on Kahi Mountain, a recruit stumbles. He drops to one knee, gasping. A sergeant steps over him. Get up. No one's coming to carry you. It sounds harsh. It is harsh, but it's also deliberate. Because in combat, hesitation gets people killed. And American training, brutal in its own way, aimed to remove hesitation. Live-fire exercises became increasingly common, not simulated, not theoretical. Real bullets, real explosions, recruits crawling under machine gun fire, feeling rounds crack overhead. You can almost hear it, the tearing sound of air splitting inches above your helmet. It does something to a soldier. It rewires fear. A U.S. Army training manual from 1943 stated, "The infantryman must close with the enemy. Fire superiority is achieved not only through weapons, but through the will to advance." That last part matters. The will to advance. German soldiers noticed it. In Tunisia, 1943. Sicily later that year. Italy after that. Early encounters were uneven. Sometimes the Americans faltered, but when they didn't, they pushed. Hard, a German officer fighting near Anzio wrote. The American infantry attacks with little regard for losses when momentum is gained. Once they begin, it is difficult to halt them. That word again. Momentum. Momentum is dangerous because it feeds itself. One squad pushes. Another follows. A third sees movement and joins. Suddenly, what began as a small breach becomes a rolling wave, not perfectly coordinated, but alive. American squads were structured differently, too. While German units centered their firepower around the machine gun, U.S. squads distributed it. The Browning automatic rifle, the BAR, gave mobile suppressive fire to smaller elements. It wasn't as dominant as the MG-42, but it was flexible, and flexibility, in close combat, often beats raw power. Picture a firefight in a narrow Italian valley. German MG-42 opens up, devastating, precise. For a moment, everything stops. Then, 2 American riflemen break left. Another team moves right. A BAR opens fire from a new angle. They're not waiting for orders. They're reacting, constantly shifting. TOA German machine gunner, trained to expect a certain rhythm. This is disorienting. Targets appear where they shouldn't. Fire comes from unexpected directions. The battlefield becomes unstable. And then there's something else. something less tangible. But just as important, American soldiers often carried a mindset that German troops struggled to categorize. They weren't driven by ideology like many Waffen-SS units. They weren't hardened by years of total war like Soviet forces. They were something in between, citizen soldiers, men who, months earlier, had been factory workers, students, farmers, now thrown into combat, with surprising aggression that a German prisoner once remarked. They smile, even under fire, not because they enjoy it, but because they believe they will win. Belief, confidence, call it what you want, but it changes how a soldier fights. Back in Normandy, weeks after D-Day, that training shows its full effect. American infantry units, despite heavy casualties, continue to press forward to bocage. Every hedgerow becomes a battle, every field a trap, but they keep moving, and German defenders begin to adjust. They reinforce positions, tighten lines, prepare ambushes, but something keeps slipping through. Not strength, not numbers, unpredictability, because when a force stops behaving the way you expect, your plans begin to fail. And when plans fail in war, fear fills the gap. Somewhere along the line, German soldiers stop asking, "How strong are they?" and start asking, "What will they do next?" And that question, that uncertainty, is far more dangerous. But training and mindset were only part of it, because on the battlefield, fear isn't just built on behavior. It's built on experience, on repeated encounters that leave a mark, moments that soldiers carry with them, from one front to the next. And for many German troops, those moments came in places where American infantry didn't just fight hard, they fought relentlessly. Italy, the Hurtgen Forest, and later, the Ardennes, where something happened that would cement a reputation, one that even hardened veterans couldn't ignore. November 18th, 1944, 16:12 hours. Hurtgen Forest, Germany. The trees are so dense they swallow the sky. Shells burst high in the branches, shredding wood into splinters that rain down like knives. The air is thick with smoke, mud, and something metallic, blood, mixed into the cold earth. A German grenadier presses himself against the base of a shattered pine. His ears are ringing. He can't tell if the next explosion is near or far. Then, footsteps. Not cautious, not probing. Fast, closing. They shouldn't be advancing. Not here, not in this forest. The Hurtgen is a nightmare. Even by Eastern Front standards, it feels wrong. Visibility is measured in meters. Artillery doesn't just kill, it maims, turning trees into shrapnel storms. Units lose direction. Entire platoons vanish between ridgelines and ravines. This is the kind of terrain where attacks stall, where armies hesitate, where doctrine says, wait, but the Americans don't. From September to December 1944, U.S. infantry units are thrown again and again into the forest. Progress is measured in yards. Casualties climb, weather worsens, and still they push. A German NCO from the 275th Infantry Division would later recall, "We expected them to stop. Anyone would have stopped, but they came again the next day and the next." There's something unsettling in that observation, not shock at strength, but at persistence. Back behind German lines, officers try to make sense of it. Reports mention heavy losses on the American side. Units rotated out, then replaced. Fresh troops stepping into the same killing ground and continuing the attack. This wasn't reckless bravery. It was something colder, systematic. The United States had something few others did in 1944. Depth, industrial strength translated into manpower, weapons, logistics. But here's the key. German soldiers didn't experience that as numbers on paper. They experienced it as waves that didn't stop coming. In the Hurtgen, a German machine gun team might repel an attack at noon. By evening, another unit appears. Different faces, same aggression. To the defenders, it feels endless, not because it literally is, but because there's no visible breaking point. And then there's the artillery. American infantry rarely fought alone. Behind them, often unseen, unheard until it was too late, was a network of firepower unlike anything the Germans faced from other Western allies. U.S. artillery doctrine emphasized speed and responsiveness. Forward observers embedded with infantry, radios in constant use. Coordinates called in within seconds. A German position holds. For a moment, it seems stable. Then, whistling, not one shell, dozens. A sudden barrage slams into the tree line, precise, concentrated. Dirt erupts, men scatter, communication breaks, and before the smoke clears, the infantry is moving again. A German officer in the forest wrote, "Their artillery arrives faster than ours can respond, and their infantry advances immediately after, as if the two are one, because in many ways they were." This combination, relentless infantry pressure backed by rapid artillery, created a rhythm that was hard to counter. Attack, suppress, advance, repeat. Not elegant, but effective. Compare that to British operations. Highly coordinated, carefully planned, strong emphasis on minimizing unnecessary losses. German soldiers respected that, but they could predict it. American operations, less predictable, sometimes less refined, but often faster to adapt mid-battle. In the chaos of the Hurtgen Forest, that difference mattered, because when the battlefield itself is unpredictable, the force that adapts faster gains the edge. Night falls early under the trees. Darkness doesn't bring relief. It brings something worse. Movement. American patrols probe forward even after sunset. Small units. Quiet. Testing lines. Looking for gaps. A German sentry hears something in the brush. He freezes. Listens. Nothing. Then, a shape. Too close. By the time he reacts, it's over. Silent. Sudden. Another hole in the line. These aren't large-scale assaults. There's something more unsettling. Constant pressure. No clear front. No safe moment. And slowly, it wears on them. Fatigue sets in not just physical, but mental. Because fighting an enemy you can't fully anticipate drains you. A captured German soldier, interrogated weeks later, summed it up in a single sentence. With the Russians, we fear their numbers. With the British, their artillery. But with the Americans, we feared not knowing when they would stop. That's the shift. Not just fear of death, but fear of uncertainty. Back in the forest, the grenadier finally raises his rifle. The footsteps are almost on top of him now. Shadows move between the trees. Voices low, urgent. American, he fires. So do they, and in the chaos that follows, something becomes clear again. This isn't a force waiting for perfect conditions. It's a force that keeps going through them. But the Hurtgen was only one piece of the puzzle. Because if relentless pressure shook German lines, what happened in the winter of 1944 would test something even deeper. Not just tactics, not just endurance, but belief. The Ardennes, December, snow, and a surprise attack that, for a moment, changed everything. December 16th, 1944, 5:30 hours. Ardennes Forest, Belgium. Snow falls in silence. Then, the sky cracks open. German artillery slams into American lines. Hundreds of guns firing in unison. The ground shakes. Trees splinter. Telephone wires snap like thread. For a moment, it works. Completely. The surprise is total. German forces surge forward through the Ardennes, exploiting thinly held sectors. American units, many inexperienced, some exhausted, are caught off guard. Positions collapse. Roads clog with retreating vehicles. Orders blur into confusion. This is what German command had been waiting for. A chance to break the Western Front. A decisive blow. And in those first hours, it looks possible. A German panzer officer later wrote, "We believed the Americans would withdraw quickly. Their line was thin, their command disrupted. The way was open." It's a familiar expectation, one rooted in earlier encounters. Assume pressure, expect collapse. But something doesn't go according to plan. Scattered American units begin to reorganize, not as a coordinated army, not immediately, but as pockets, resistance forming in fragments. A roadblock here, a defensive stand there, Small groups digging in, refusing to move. At Landsrath Ridge, a single U.S. reconnaissance platoon, just 18 men, holds off an entire German battalion for nearly a full day, not with overwhelming firepower, not with superior numbers, but with positioning and refusal to give ground. Again and again, German advances run into unexpected resistance, not strong enough to stop them entirely, but enough to slow them, disrupt them, and in an offensive built on speed. Time is everything. By December 19th, the town of Bastogne becomes the focal point, snow-covered, surrounded. American forces, primarily from the 101st Airborne Division, are encircled, cut off, outnumbered. From a German perspective, this should be simple. Encircle, demand surrender, advance. A message is sent under a white flag. Terms are clear. Surrender. Avoid unnecessary bloodshed. The reply? One word. Nuts. Confusion at first. German officers aren't sure what it means. Then it's explained. It means no. No surrender. No withdrawal. Inside Bastogne, conditions are brutal. Ammunition low. Medical supplies stretched. Temperatures dropping below freezing. And yet, the line holds. German artillery pounds the town. Infantry probes defenses. Armor attempts to break through. But every attack meets resistance. Not flawless. Not without losses. But unbroken. A German soldier later described it. We expected them to break. Surrounded, cold, without supplies, anyone would have broken. But they did not. That expectation again. And again, it fails. This is where something deeper sets in. Because now, it's not just about tactics or firepower. It's about will. American infantry, in these moments, demonstrate a pattern, even when surprised, even when outnumbered, even when cut off. They fight, and that consistency becomes its own kind of weapon for German troops advancing through the Ardennes. The problem isn't just resistance. It's where it appears. A unit pushes forward, bypassing a pocket of defenders. Behind them, that pocket remains, still active, still dangerous. Supply lines become vulnerable. Routes are contested. Rear areas no longer safe. The battlefield becomes fragmented, unstable, and once again, predictability disappears. A German officer noted in his report, American units, even when isolated, continue to engage. They do not dissolve as expected. That's the key. They don't dissolve. Even in retreat, they resist. Even when surrounded, they fight. That changes how an army advances. Because now, every position, even a weak one, must be treated as a threat. Progress slows. Momentum falters. And in the Ardennes, momentum was everything. Days pass. Weather clears. Allied air power returns. American reinforcements arrive. The window closes. What began as a bold offensive becomes a struggle, then a withdrawal. For German soldiers, the lesson is clear. Again, reinforced. American infantry might not always hold perfectly. They might bend. They might even break in places. But they come back. Fast, hard, and often unexpectedly. Back in Bastogne, the siege finally lifts. Snow still falls. The forest still burns in places. But the line holds. And for those who fought there on both sides, something has changed. Because now the question isn't just, how strong are they? Or what will they do next? It's something more unsettling. When will they stop? But to fully understand why that question mattered, you have to look at the other side of it. Why didn't German soldiers feel the same way about British forces or other Allied troops? The answer isn't simple. And it isn't about weakness. It's about difference, doctrine, approach, and perception shaped by experience. Because fear in war isn't always about who is stronger. Sometimes it's about who feels harder to understand. And that difference is where the final piece of the story lies. July 26, 1944, 7:40 hours, south of Caen, France. The ground trembles before the first tank even appears. German soldiers brace inside reinforced positions. Trenches carved deep, machine guns set. fields of fire carefully measured. They've been watching this sector for days, waiting, expecting, and right on schedule, the barrage begins. British artillery rolls in like a storm front, not sudden, not chaotic, but deliberate, layered, calculated. Shells land in sequence, walking forward across German lines with almost mechanical precision. Behind it, armor, infantry, advancing together. To a German officer, this is familiar, dangerous, yes, but understandable. The British Army, forged through years of war, emphasized coordination above all else. Infantry, armor, artillery, each element carefully integrated, attacks planned in detail, objectives defined, timetables followed, and when it worked beautifully. Operation Goodwood, Operation Epsom, later totalize. Massive offensives built on firepower and structure. German soldiers respected it. They feared the artillery. They feared the tanks. But they could read it. A veteran of the 12th SS Panzer Division later remarked, with the British, you knew the attack was coming. You could feel it build. There was time to prepare. That preparation mattered, because even under heavy bombardment, a soldier who understands what's happening feels less lost. That's the difference. Not in lethality, but in perception. British doctrine sought to reduce uncertainty. American behavior, whether by design or circumstance, often increased it. Back near Ken, the barrage lifts. German machine gunners emerge from cover. They know what comes next. Infantry advancing behind armor. They adjust sights, prepare firing lanes. The battle begins. Hard, brutal, costly, but in many cases, German defenders hold longer against these structured assaults, not because they are weaker against British forces, but because they can anticipate the flow of battle. Predictability creates windows, moments to react, moments to adapt, and war at its core is about time. This isn't to say British or Commonwealth troops lacked aggression. Far from it. Units like the Canadian Infantry at Juno Beach, British paratroopers at Arnhem, fought with extraordinary courage and determination, but their operational style often emphasized control, minimizing chaos, maintaining cohesion. The Americans, they often fought through chaos, and that distinction shaped how German soldiers experienced them. A German intelligence summary from late 1944 noted, British attacks are methodical and rely heavily on artillery preparation. American attacks are more fluid, with infantry advancing under varied conditions and exploiting opportunities rapidly. That word again, fluid. Fluid is hard to counter because it doesn't follow a fixed shape. Imagine two rivers, one controlled by channels, flowing in a known direction, the other shifting, branching, finding new paths as it moves. Which one is harder to block? Back on the Western Front, this difference becomes more pronounced as the war progresses. German units facing British forces develop countermeasures tailored to that style, deep defensive belts, fallback positions, pre-sighted artillery zones. Against American forces, those same measures don't always hold, because the attack doesn't always come where expected, or how expected. A German captain wrote in his diary, against the Americans, the situation changes too quickly. What is true in the morning may not be true by afternoon. That instability breeds stress, constant adjustment, constant doubt, and doubt in combat is dangerous. But there's another layer, one less visible, yet just as important. Logistics. American infantry didn't just fight aggressively, they were supported aggressively. Supplies moved fast, ammunition replenished quickly, units rotated, when possible, before complete exhaustion. To a German soldier in late 1944, increasingly cut off from reliable resupply, this contrast was stark. They would fight a U.S. unit, inflict losses, expect a lull. Instead, another unit appears. Fresh, equipped, ready. It creates an illusion that the enemy is endless, and illusions in war become reality very quickly, because soldiers don't fight statistics. They fight what they experience. And what many German soldiers experienced was this: an enemy that didn't always follow expected rules, that adapted quickly, that kept pressure on, that returned even after setbacks. Meanwhile, British forces, though highly capable and often devastating, presented a more structured battlefield, one that could be studied, anticipated, so the fear was different. Not less, but different. Respect for British precision, concern for Soviet numbers, but with American infantry, something closer to unease. Because when you can't fully understand how your enemy fights, you begin to question your own assumptions. And once that happens, every sound in the dark feels closer. Every movement feels faster. Every attack feels bigger than it is. Back in Normandy, the Ardennes, the forests and towns across Western Europe, that perception spread from squad to squad, from veteran to recruit. Stories told quietly, warnings pass along. They move fast. They don't stop. You can't predict them. And over time, those stories became belief. And belief is what soldiers carry into battle. But here's the final twist. The Americans weren't always better. They weren't always cleaner. They weren't always more efficient. But they were often just unpredictable enough, just relentless enough, to leave an impression that lingered. And in war, sometimes that's all it takes. Because fear isn't always born from superiority. Sometimes it's born from uncertainty, from a feeling that no matter what you prepare for, it might not be enough. And for many German soldiers facing American infantry in the final years of World War II, that feeling never fully went away. Not in the hedgerows, not in the forests, not even in the snow.